Maybe today was your best day, or your worst. But if you're here, it means your mind just won't stop moving. Mine doesn't either. So for now, forget the noise, drown the outside world, kill the lights, and drift into this moment with me while the rest of mankind slumbers. Some stories don't live in daylight. They wait for nights like this, when the world is finally quiet enough to listen. This is history for the restless mind. Let's travel far away together. But before we journey back through centuries, I'm curious. Where in the world are you right now? What time is it where you're listening? Are you watching the sunset, or has night already claimed your sky? I love knowing how far these stories travel, so leave a comment and tell me. And now, settle in. Because tonight we're going somewhere most history books forgot to mention. There was a city once. A city so vast, so perfectly ordered, that when European travellers first laid eyes on it, they could barely comprehend what they were seeing. Its streets stretched wider than any avenue in London. Its walls rose higher than the fortifications of Paris. Its bronze work was so intricate, so impossibly refined, that even the finest craftsmen of Renaissance Italy would have wept at the sight of it. And yet, if you open most history books today, you will find only silence, a few scattered paragraphs, a footnote, maybe a single photograph of an artifact locked behind museum glass. But the city was real. It breathed, it thrived, it shone. And then, in the span of a single week, it was erased. Tonight, we're travelling to West Africa, to the heart of what is now Nigeria, to a place that once held more wealth, more artistry, more civilization than almost anywhere else on Earth. We're going to the great Benin city, the city that outshone London, and then disappeared. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a forest. The air is thick and warm, heavy with the scent of earth and leaves. You can hear the distant call of birds you've never seen before, their songs echoing through trees that have stood for centuries. And then, through the green, you see it. A wall, not a fence, not a crude barrier of wood and stone. A wall. Towering, monumental, stretching as far as your eyes can follow, disappearing into the horizon on both sides like the spine of some ancient sleeping giant. It's made of earth, yes, but earth transformed, packed and shaped and carved with such precision that it gleams red in the afternoon sun. The wall rises 4 stories high in places, maybe more, and it doesn't stand alone. There are more walls behind it, layers upon layers of them, concentric rings of fortification that wrap around the city like the petals of a flower protecting its centre. This is the outer boundary of Benin City, and already, before you've even stepped inside, you know you're standing at the edge of something extraordinary. The walls of Benin were not just defensive structures. They were a statement. A declaration. They said, we are here, we are organised, we are mighty. And they were right. Archaeologists now estimate that the entire system of walls and earthworks around Benin City and its surrounding territories covered more than 16,000 kilometres. 16,000. That's 4 times the length of the Great Wall of China. Let that settle for a moment. 4 times the Great Wall, built by hand, by a civilization that most of the Western world pretends never existed. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's go back. Back to the beginning. Back to when Benin was not yet a city but a dream. The story begins somewhere around the 11th century, maybe earlier. The exact dates blur into legend, the way all ancient origins do. But we know this much. There was a people called the Edo, and they lived in the forests of what is now southern Nigeria. They were farmers, traders, craftsmen. They had their own language, their own gods, their own way of seeing the world. And sometime around the year 1180, they decided they needed a leader. Not a chief chosen by birth alone, but a ruler who could bring order, who could unite the scattered villages and clans into something greater. They sent emissaries to the neighbouring Yoruba kingdom of Ife, a place already legendary for its wisdom and its art. And Ife sent them a prince. His name was Oranmiyan. Oranmiyan arrived in the forests of the Edo people and looked around at the land, at the rivers and the trees and the people who called him. And he saw potential. He saw what could be built. So he stayed. He married. He ruled. And when his son was born, that child became the first Oba of Benin. Oba. The word means king, but it means more than that. It means sacred ruler, divine intermediary, the living bridge between the human world and the spirit world. The Oba was not just a political leader. He was the heart of the city, the centre of everything. And from that moment forward, Benin began to grow. By the 13th century, Benin was no longer a collection of villages. It was a city, and not just any city. It was a capital, a seat of power, a hub of trade and culture that stretched its influence across the entire region. The streets were wide and straight, laid out in a grid pattern that would have impressed any Roman city planner. They were swept clean every morning. Every morning. There was no trash in the streets of Benin, no filth, no chaos. The city was organised, orderly, intentional. Homes were built from red clay, their walls decorated with intricate patterns and symbols. Each compound housed an extended family, and each compound was connected to the next by those wide, immaculate streets. In the centre of it all stood the Oba's palace. And oh, the palace. It wasn't just a building. It was a complex, a city within a city. It sprawled across acres of land, its walls adorned with bronze plaques that told the history of the kingdom, that depicted gods and ancestors and great battles and quiet moments of daily life. The craftsmanship was astonishing. Each plaque was cast using a technique called lost wax casting, a process so delicate, so precise, that even today, with all our modern tools, it's difficult to replicate. The artists of Benin would sculpt a figure in wax, cover it in clay, heat it until the wax melted away, and then pour molten bronze into the hollow mould left behind. The result? Art that seemed to breathe, faces so lifelike you could see the expression in their eyes, hands so detailed you could count the lines in their palms. Warriors frozen mid-battle, their muscles tense, their spears raised. Queens adorned in coral beads, their gazes calm and regal. These weren't just decorations, they were history. They were memory cast in metal. And they covered the palace walls, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, glinting in the sunlight like a second skin of gold and bronze. But Benin was not just beautiful, it was powerful. By the 15th century, the Kingdom of Benin controlled a vast network of trade routes that stretched from the forests to the coast, from the rivers to the savannas. They traded in ivory, in pepper, in textiles, in palm oil, and yes, eventually, tragically, in human lives. But we'll come to that. For now, let's stay in the height of Benin's glory. Let's stay in the moment before the fall. In 1485, Portuguese sailors arrived on the coast of West Africa. They were the first Europeans to make contact with the Kingdom of Benin, and they were stunned by what they found. One Portuguese captain wrote, "The town is large and well ordered. The houses are built in good proportion, and the streets are wide and straight. The people are civilized and courteous." Another traveller described the Ober's palace as large as the city of Harlem, with countless apartments and galleries and walls covered in bronze plaques that shine like mirrors. These were not exaggerations. When the Portuguese arrived in Benin, London was still a medieval city of narrow, filthy streets and wooden houses. Paris was recovering from the 100 Years' War. Rome was magnificent, yes, but its glory was inherited from an empire long dead. Benin's glory was now. It was alive, it was thriving, and the Europeans knew it. For the next 2 centuries, Benin maintained its independence and its prosperity. The Obas ruled with absolute authority, but also with wisdom. They understood diplomacy. They understood trade. They knew how to navigate the dangerous new world of European contact without losing their identity. But nothing lasts forever. By the 19th century, the world was changing. European powers were no longer content to trade as equals. They wanted control. They wanted land. They wanted resources. And they wanted submission. The British Empire in particular had set its sights on West Africa. They called it the scramble for Africa, this mad rush to carve up an entire continent and claim it as their own. And Benin stood in their way, not because Benin sought conflict, but because Benin refused to bow. In 1897, a British delegation led by Acting Consul General James Phillips decided to visit Benin City. It was January, and the Oba had sent word that this was not a good time. The city was in the middle of sacred rituals, ceremonies that outsiders were not permitted to witness. Phillips ignored the warning. He marched toward Benin with a party of European officials and African porters, unarmed, confident in the power of British authority. They never reached the city. Benin warriors ambushed the party on the road. Phillips and most of his men were killed. The British called it a massacre. The Edo people called it defence. But it didn't matter what it was called. It was the excuse the British needed. Within weeks, a punitive expedition was assembled. Over 1,200 British soldiers and sailors, armed with rifles, machine guns, and artillery, marched toward Benin City. The Oba sent emissaries. He tried to negotiate, he offered compensation, he asked for peace. The British didn't want peace. They wanted conquest. On February 18th, 1897, British forces reached the city walls, and they set fire to everything. Imagine it. Imagine standing in the heart of a city that has stood for 700 years. A city your ancestors built. A city of bronze and memory and order. And now it's burning. The British soldiers moved through the streets, torching every building they found. The Oba's palace, with its galleries and its courtyards and its bronze plaques, was ransacked. Soldiers tore the plaques from the walls, pried the ivory tusks from their pedestals, looted everything they could carry. What they couldn't carry, they destroyed. Fires raged for days. The smoke rose so thick that it blotted out the sun. The air was choked with ash and heat and the smell of burning wood and earth. The Oba fled into the forest. He was eventually captured, deposed, and exiled. And Benin City, The city that had outshone London was left in ruins. But that wasn't the end of the story, because the British soldiers, when they returned to London with their loot, didn't quite know what to do with it. They'd expected to find a barbaric settlement, a primitive village. Instead, they'd found art. Thousands of bronze plaques, ivory sculptures, coral beads, works of such exquisite craftsmanship that European museums and collectors immediately began to covet them. The British Museum acquired hundreds of pieces. The Ethnological Museum in Berlin took more. Private collectors in Europe and America bought what they could. And the story told in the newspapers was this: we discovered lost treasures in a savage land. They called them the Benin Bronzes. But they were never lost. They were stolen. And the city that created them? The civilization that cast them, that lived with them, that understood their stories? Erased. For decades, Benin was a ghost. The city was occupied, reorganized under British colonial rule, stripped of its identity. The Edo people remained, of course, but the kingdom was gone. The Oba's authority was reduced to a ceremonial role. The palace was never rebuilt, and in the wider world, Benin became a footnote, a curiosity, a source of museum artifacts whose origins were conveniently vague. The plaques were displayed in London and Berlin and New York, labelled as relics of a lost African kingdom. But the story told alongside them was always the same. We saved these from obscurity. We preserved them. We brought them to civilization, as if civilization hadn't created them in the first place. But memory is stubborn, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of rising back to the surface. In recent decades, scholars and activists have begun to demand the return of the Benin Bronzes, not as gifts, not as loans, but as restitution, as an acknowledgement of what was taken and what was destroyed. Some museums have resisted. They've argued that the artifacts are better cared for in European institutions, that they belong to humanity, that history is complicated. But others have begun to listen. In 2021, Germany announced it would begin returning Benin Bronzes to Nigeria. France followed. The Smithsonian in the United States has committed to repatriation. The British Museum, which holds the largest collection, has been slower to move, but the pressure is mounting. And in Benin City itself, a new museum is being built. The Edo Museum of West African Art, a place where the bronzes can finally come home, where the story of the city can be told not by outsiders, but by the people who lived it, who carry it in their blood and their memory. So what do we make of all this? What do we do with the story of a city that was erased but refuses to be forgotten? I think we start by remembering. We remember that Benin was real, that it was great, that it was not primitive, not savage, not a blank space waiting to be discovered by Europeans. It was a civilization, one of the most sophisticated in the world. And it was destroyed not because it was weak, but because it stood in the way of empire. We remember that art is not just decoration, it's memory, it's identity, and when you steal someone's art, you steal their history. We remember that the past is not neutral. It's not dead. It's alive in every museum display, every textbook, every story we tell about who we are and where we come from. And we ask ourselves, what stories are we still not telling? What cities, what civilizations, what voices have been erased from the narrative? Because Benin is not unique. It's one of many. One of countless cultures and kingdoms and peoples whose stories have been buried under the weight of colonialism and conquest. But the walls are still there. Beneath the earth, overgrown with vines and thyme, the walls of Benin still stand. And that means the memory is still there too, waiting for nights like this, when the world is quiet enough to listen. There's something haunting about walking through a museum and seeing artifacts torn from their context. You stand in front of a bronze plaque, beautifully lit, carefully labelled, and you read about lost wax casting and artistic technique. But you don't read about the fire. You don't read about the soldiers tearing it from the wall. You don't read about the city burning in the background, or the oba fleeing into the forest, or the silence that followed. You see beauty, but you don't see the wound. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what colonialism does best. It takes something whole and breaks it into pieces, and then it displays those pieces as if they were always fragments. As if there was never a context, never a home, never a people who made them and loved them and understood what they meant. But there was. There always was. Let's go back one more time. Not to the burning, but to before, to the height of Benin's power. It's the 16th century. The city is alive. The streets are bustling with traders and craftsmen and children running barefoot in the dust. The air smells of roasting yams and palm oil and the smoke from cooking fires. In the palace courtyard, a bronze caster is at work. He's been apprenticed since he was a boy, learning the secrets of the craft from his father, who learned it from his father before him. The knowledge is passed down through families, through generations, like a song that never ends. He's working on a plaque. It depicts a warrior on horseback, his armour detailed, his expression calm and focused. The wax model is perfect. The mould is prepared. Tomorrow he'll pour the bronze. But for now he's just a man at work, doing what his ancestors did, creating something that will last. He doesn't know that one day this plaque will be torn from the palace wall, that it will cross an ocean, that it will end up behind glass in a museum in Berlin or London or New York. He doesn't know that people will stand in front of it and marvel at its beauty, but never think to ask, who made this? What did it mean to them? What world did it come from? He doesn't know that the city he lives in, the city he loves, will be burned to the ground. But he also doesn't know that centuries later, his work will still be here, that it will still be beautiful, that it will still carry the memory of Benin, even when the city itself is gone. Because that's what art does. It outlives us. It outlasts empires and fires and time itself. It remembers. And that's the strange, bittersweet truth of Benin City. It was destroyed, yes, but it was never truly erased. The bronzes survived, the walls survived, the memory survived. And now, slowly, painfully, the story is being reclaimed. The Edo people are still here. The Oba still holds his title, his ceremonies, his place in the cultural life of the region. The language is still spoken. The traditions are still practiced. Benin City exists today, not as it was, but as something new. A city rebuilt on the bones of the old. A place where the past and the present live side by side, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension, but always together. And that's not nothing. That's resilience. That's survival. It's the refusal to disappear. So tonight, As you lie in the dark, as your mind wanders through the hours before sleep finally comes, think about Benin. Think about the city that outshone London. The city with streets so clean you could walk barefoot without fear. The city with walls that stretched for thousands of kilometres. The city where art was not a luxury, but a language. Think about what it means to build something beautiful, something lasting, only to have it taken away. And think about what it means to remember, because memory is an act of resistance. It's a refusal to let the past be rewritten, to let the victors control the narrative. Memory says, I was here, we were here, this happened, you will not erase us. And maybe, in the end, that's the most powerful thing of all. Not the bronze or the walls or the palace, but the fact that we're still talking about it, still remembering, still asking questions, still refusing to let Benin disappear. The night is deep now. The world outside your window is quiet, and somewhere, on the other side of the planet, the sun is rising over West Africa, over the land where Benin once stood, over the walls that still lie beneath the earth, waiting to be rediscovered. The city is not gone, not really. It's just sleeping, waiting for the day when its story can be told in full, when the bronzes come home, when the memory is no longer a wound, but a testament. And until that day comes, we keep the story alive. We keep it in our minds, in our conversations, in nights like this, when history feels less like a textbook and more like a living, breathing thing. Because that's what it is. History isn't dead. It's not locked away in museums or buried under ruins. It's here, with us, waiting to be remembered. And that's where we'll leave tonight's journey. Somewhere out there the sun is rising, and somewhere else it's still deep night. Wherever you are, thank you for keeping me company in the quiet. If you're still awake, tell me, where in the world are you listening from right now? I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed drifting through the past with me, make sure to follow along for the next one. Until then, rest easy and let your mind wander kindly. This has been History for the Restless Mind. Until we meet again.